Explaining the Rwandan Genocide. In Rwanda, there are two main ethnic groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis. The less numerous Tutsis grazed cattle, while the more numerous Hutus made crops. The less numerous, but much more wealthy Tutsis would eventually take power of the Rwandan kingdom. However, in 1899, the Germans would colonize Rwanda and would incorporate it into their colony of German East Africa. Prior to the colonization, Hutus and Tutsis were just names used to show ranks in society. However, after the colonization, the Germans brought the idea of the Hutus and Tutsis being two different ethnic groups. Despite the area now being colonized, the Germans decided to keep the Tutsi monarchy, and later down the line the Belgians decided to disenfranchise the Hutus even further. Although the Tutsis ruled Rwanda, the Hutus would find jobs within the Catholic Church, and the Hutu clergy would call for emancipation. Because of this, in 1959 a Hutu rebel group would overthrow the Belgian-backed Tutsi government. With the Hutus now in power, the Hutus began killing hundreds of thousands of Tutsis, and many more would flee to neighboring countries such as Uganda and Zaire. These Tutsis would form militias, and over the years they would try to attack Rwanda. However, most of the time, this would fail. In the 1980s, many of the refugees who had fled to Uganda would join the Ugandan Bush War and would help Museveni secure power. They would attempt to get Uganda to declare war on Rwanda. However, this would fail. Because of this, in 1990, Fred Rwigema would form the Rwandan Patriotic Front. With an experienced army, the RPF would invade Rwanda, and this would start the Rwandan Civil War. Colonel Habyarimana had been in rule of Rwanda for over 17 years in that point after he had overthrown the government in a coup. Despite being in power, many Hutu extremists, such as his own wife, had much influence within Rwanda. This group of Hutu extremists began producing anti-Tutsi propaganda. During the war, Rwigema died, leading to Paul Kagame becoming the leader of the RPF. However, the RPF's guerrilla tactics continued to make no progress. After 2.5 years of fighting, France, the United States, and the Organization for African Unity stepped in to help form a ceasefire. In August of 1993, the Arusha Accords would be signed, which would split the government between the two political parties. The RPF and the ruling party, the MRND, largely split power. However, many Hutus were not happy with this. The nation's Hutu power radio station told listeners how to deal with Tutsis. Meanwhile, the MRND youth branch would become more militant. Plus, many newer groups, such as the Coalition for the Defense of the Republic, also had militant youth groups. Despite growing tensions, Habyarimana was able to keep peace. However, in April of 1994, Habyarimana's plane was shot down, killing him. Today, nobody quite knows who did it, whether it be the RPF or Hutu extremists. The following day, the Prime Minister of Rwanda, along with her UN bodyguards, were killed by soldiers within the Rwandan army. The RPF would be forced to stop Hutu extremists from taking over the government building. The Hutu extremist, Bagosora, would take over as the interim leader of Rwanda. Because there were no more moderates left in the government, the anti-Tutsi propagandists began calling for violence. Radio hosts would give out the information of RPF members and would encourage people who were armed to go out and hunt them down. Hutu militias and soldiers began indiscriminately killing Tutsis. The UN soldiers who had been there during the Arusha Accords had left by then, so there was nobody to stop the Hutus. Paul Kagame, the leader of the RPF, gave an ultimatum to the Hutus, saying that if the killing did not stop, he and his army would invade Rwanda. The killing, however, would not stop, and so the RPF would invade Rwanda from Uganda. The RPF would make their advance on Kigali and would be able to save some Tutsi who were fleeing. Within just 100 days, anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million Tutsis and Hutus were killed, mainly by militias. Many more were raped and maimed. Meanwhile, Kagame spent his time surrounding Kigali, and in July of 1994, he would capture the city. With the city now captured, Kagame would set up a coalition government and would put himself in power of Rwanda. With Kagame now in power inside of Rwanda, 3 million Hutus would flee the country to neighboring countries such as Zaire. However, many people who carried out the genocide would flee along with these refugees, and the refugee presence within Zaire would help start the Congo War a few years later. In conclusion, the Rwandan Genocide was a period of 100 days during the Rwandan Civil War, wherein around 500,000 Tutsis and Hutus were killed by Hutu militias due to anti-Tutsi racism. Thank you for watching this video on the Rwandan Genocide.